Alright, here we go, yet again. I have enjoyed these two-game slates more than I thought I would. There's always been a little something to do. Generally, I think it's been largely profitable for a lot of people. More profitable than the last couple months of the regular season in general, were you to congeal everyone's exposure. There's a few reasons for this. One, they've kept the prize pools large enough to keep the fish in the pool. If the largest prize pool is, $50,000, pretty hard to get enough people interested, and just your average level of talent comes up to a point where it's a little more difficult to, certainly cuts away at whatever potential edge you have. A lot of sites not devoting significant resources to having updated coverage, so even the many of the medium sharks, the medium to high, the high skill players not playing with as much information as they should. So it's a lot like similar years. The most profitable times of the year have been summer leagues, preseasons, and postseasons, simply because you can't just sort of coast into it, and people aren't really paying attention, and the level of content available out there in the industry is lower than it is for much of the regular season, and for all those reasons, it tends to be a more profitable time. Stuff. So, let us go then, you and I, where the evening is spread out across the sky like a patient etherized upon a table, discussing this evening's two-game slate. It's interesting. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance here, because even down to sort of the micro details, both of these series have gone about how I expected them to, right from sort of the beginning. So it's where first few days were very profitable because we were just more on guys other people weren't on, and less on guys who people were on who we successfully predicted would struggle in this series. To now having to still find the guys who are outliers, find people who the public overreacted to. Last night went fairly well. The recommended Kawhi fade turned out to be correct in a complete and total luck bomb. Obviously, both games basically blew out, making DFS pretty much a random pile of bullshit, but Jokic did end up being a little better than Kawhi, because they just mauled them by quite so much. So my theory for playing less Kawhi yesterday was the ownership was at a new high of 72%, and at some point his super hyper effective playing had to come down, and it didn't. He just thankfully only played 3 quarters and only ended up with 47 or 48, but he was going to drop a 65 bomb or some insane number yesterday, so shout out to me/us getting incredibly lucky. The day before yesterday, which was these same 4 teams, these same 2 games, went about as well as any show I've ever had. We had many people get over 100 to 1 ROI. Lots of people won lots of money. So it puts me in the interesting position tonight of, I kind of like the same guys. Now we have some interesting information with Brad Stevens dropping some hints about possibly making some changes, with Malcolm Brogdon returning to the rotation. And obviously both series also changing venue. But difficult for me to not simply parrot what I said about 48 hours ago. People are sending me "where the hell are you" tweets. I presume we're going somewhere now. Hey, there it is. So let me just take this and tweet it out, because people are sending me funny Judge Judy gifs, which are funny. Here we go. Look, a tweet. Alright then. So I guess I'll just start at the beginning and continue straight through to the end, and then stop. Feel free to fire your questions in along the way. They certainly make the show infinitely better if you are a member of Awesemo.com, which, honestly, why aren't you? And in the event you hit your big 100 to 1 ROI tonight, that's all I ask for, and thanks. If you win like a giant pile of money, you get into the 5 digits and want to contact me, we can arrange a charity donation. I'm a big fan of that. But otherwise, yeah, subscribe. It keeps the whole model going. If you've been lucky enough to profit off of our free content, we do that so that we can eventually suck you into our horrible Ponzi scheme. So, let's start talking. I like Kyrie Irving a lot. So he's been balls. He's been bad. But Has he, though? Like, if you look at his price on DraftKings, and we'll start by talking about DraftKings, which, again, we got about twice as many people playing on DraftKings as FanDuel, so that's my default, what I'm referring to when I'm talking about liking or disliking a guy. Although point guard on FanDuel is terrible, so you're obviously just fine playing Kyrie Irving. But Kyrie at $8,200, I still like significantly more than Steph Curry. There's obviously a lot going on here. I'm not shocked to see a scenario in which Kyrie goes out, has a temper tantrum, doesn't play the last 20 minutes of the game, and, Terry Rozier finishes out the game and they get horrifically blown out, and this is his last game in Boston. And, none of that shit would surprise me. Clearly, the Celtics have been an amusing follow this year. Between their vocal Twitter presence, with a number of people, including luminaries in the DFS touting community who are big stans for the Celtics, their frequent Kyrie tantrums, and then every month or so you get a story about we're all on the same page now. It's great. A few weeks ago it was dicey, but right now we're all holding hands and singing Kumbaya and playing Xbox together, and we're more united than we've ever been. And then, getting their ass pushed in again, and rumors, and Kyrie's going to be playing for the Chinese something league. All that said, assuming his ownership stays at a reasonably tolerable level, and we have it staying at a reasonably tolerable level, I'm still a pretty big fan of Kyrie Irving. So in this series, he had the one truly dreadful game in which he only played, 31 minutes in the blowout and had 25 fantasy points. And in the other three, he had 42, 46, and 52 or something like that. He was good in the 52, which was, I think, game one of the series. But other than that, he's been in balls terrible. But the minutes have clearly been there. I think he played 44, I want to say, in the last game, or 43 and change. And had, I think, 49.5 on DraftKings, shooting 30% from the damn field, or 32%, or it was 7 for 22. I would be surprised if the minutes went down. Wouldn't shock me, as I previously alluded to, but I would expect him to play 40 minutes again. I do think he has a certain... he reminds me a lot of Kevin Durant as a player, psychologically, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but I do think he is playing games in his own head about his reputation and his thing in the league, and you hear him make statements when people are when he shot 8 for 22, they're like, dude, I don't think you're going to see another one of those, and then he went out and shot 7 for 22. Yeah, I think that's sitting with him a little bit. When he said, I was shooting badly, but I wanted to keep shooting, I'm going to keep shooting, the confidence seems to be there. The will to do better seems to be there. It seems unlikely to me he suddenly starts to defer. Put it that way. And 8,200 is 8,200. It's sort of in that thing where I think there's a lot of overthinking it going on. It's in that thing with Eric Bledsoe. Eric Bledsoe is a really good fantasy basketball player. He has a very good chance of getting 40 tonight. And by very good, I mean 20% or something. He's $4,900 on DK. It's $4,900. How many players under $5,000 on DK tonight have a double-digit percentage chance of getting you 40 fantasy points? And we'll get to that in a second when we go across the ball, and obviously Brogdon's return potentially creates a minute issue, although, spoiler alert, I expect Pat C to get the snub there. The haircut, as the Josh Engelman likes to say. I like Kyrie a lot. What do you project Kyrie's line for tonight for minutes and shots? I'll say 45 and 25. I think that's a reasonable guess. He costs $8,200. How do you think he produces? What's your projection for him in fantasy points? I am at 49. 49 for a projection at $8,200 feels pretty goddamn good. So, if his ownership is as low as we project it to be, we have him at 39%. I would want more than that. That's not as low as I would like. You're looking for some sort of advantage here. It should be pointed out that at the moment our projected ownership, which seems about right to me, there's nothing here I hate on DraftKings at least, is really, really dense. We will start at Kyrie at 39. We have Kyrie 39, Chris Paul 40. He'll be under that. That's too high. Gordon Hayward, 41. Draymond Green, 42. James Harden, 42. Al Horford, 44. He'll be under that again, if for no other reason than just it's apparently his goal in life to be under-owned on this slate, although I have maybe less appeal for him than I have on other days. He's still a brilliant play. We can expect the minutes to be up. If we look at the minutes in that last game, certainly he and Kyrie led the way. I'll actually load the box for this one because I don't have it perfectly remembered. Yeah, we got 43.5 out of Kyrie and 38.25 out of Al Horford. And obviously there is no tomorrow for these guys, so not insane to think that they might keep up. But even at just those numbers, those two guys feel pretty good at their prices. Yeah, I like Kyrie. Simply based on upside ownership price. Just sort of maths out a little better for me. There are no giant edges tonight. Even when we looked at the last game of the series, there were big ownership edges. We got Austin Rivers at 12% last time. I still really like Austin Rivers on both sites. Obviously, he played 30-plus minutes. But that number is going to come way up. Feels good to be there first, but feels bad every time that just everyone sort of floods onto your play. And if it's good, you don't feel that great. And if it's bad, you feel even worse. So there's Kyrie Irving. Brad Stevens alluded to in his press conference that he might make a change to the starting lineup for the purpose of getting more scoring to the bench. This is a subtle shot at Gordon Hayward, who's not been good. So there's a bit to talk about here and a bit to unpack. But the first thing I would say is I don't think that we need... Sorry, some alerts popping. I don't think we need to overreact to this news. As a matter of fact, I almost want to underreact to this news. I believe the most likely thing you will see here is Gordon Hayward moves to the starting unit and Marcus Morris moves to the bench if a change is made. That seems to be the most likely change to me. I would consider this a downgrade for Gordon Hayward, who has looked bad. Now, $4,100 is $4,100. He scored single-digit fantasy points last game, but obviously there is an upside with this guy. He can get hot. But I think he is one of the more likely candidates to lose minutes to Marcus Smart. I think moving to the starting unit costs him usage. So you need a couple things to go well. He needs to pick up usage playing with the starters that he wasn't getting coming off the bench. Coming off the bench last game, played 27 minutes, took 5 shots. So you somehow need that to change in a game in which their most potent offensive weapon is Horford and Kyrie and the pick and roll, and we expect Kyrie to, try to put his thing down a little bit, and the pick and roll between those two guys, or the pick and pop alternatingly, is their best offensive play, and somehow I need Hayward to turn this around. So I guess the long and short of that story for me is, I think if that news did occur, the public would all of a sudden have less Morris and more Hayward, where I would consider that to be the opposite of the appropriate action. I would want more Morris, who's going to be pretty highly owned today, coming off a couple good games, has looked good in this series, but he would move to the bench and people would be like, oh, no, and I would like that. It would raise my projection for him by a point or a point and a half or something, and I would want less Hayward, so kind of hope they make that change because I think it will be incorrectly reacted to both ways. Couple other things. So in this last game, we saw only 30 minutes of Jaylen Brown, and we ended up seeing 34 out of Marcus Morris, 35 out of Jason Tatum. They wanted to give Jaylen Brown more time. Again, I've been sort of a Jaylen Brown stan coming into this series, and he's been pretty good. He's getting your point a minute. In this last game, got you at 30 in 30 minutes. But he was in pretty significant foul trouble, and that turned into extra time for mostly Tatum and Hayward. I think there's a real chance you only get, starting or not, 22, 24 minutes out of Gordon Hayward tonight. I have a real concern for that. There's no tomorrow for this team, and obviously for a lot of this season, during his struggles, they've been, trying to boost Gordon Hayward's morale, and, oh, come on, you can get there, and just keep giving him opportunities, and there has been times that he's rallied, but he's not playing well, and at this point, you're down 3-1. It would not surprise me to see him get a pretty significant haircut for minutes here. But going back to what I was just referring to, Jaylen Brown in that last game had no fouls in his first shift, then picked up 2 in his second shift, got pulled out, went back in briefly, got his 3rd foul. Both of those occurrences led to more time for Tatum. Started the 4th quarter and picked up his 4th foul pretty quick, which led to Gordon Hayward coming in a little quicker. So I think if he were not in foul trouble, you get 33 instead of 34 minutes out of Marcus Morris. You get 31 or 32 minutes instead of 35 out of Jason Tatum. And you get 25 instead of 27 minutes out of Gordon Hayward. And you would have gotten like 36 minutes of Jaylen Brown. So I have trouble choosing between these guys, but I probably would still have Jaylen Brown as my favorite of these guys. I really like Kyrie Irving. I really like Al Horford. After that, as a generality for who I like, it probably does become Jaylen Brown in third place for me. I would rather play him at lower ownership at 4,700 than Gordon Hayward at 4,100, if possible. Obviously, nothing wrong with playing Gordon Hayward. In 25 minutes, he can get you 34 for 4,100, and that would feel great, but there are some things stacked up against him there. Let's see. We'll call that it for the Celtics now and come back to them in questions. Again, please send me any queries and interrogatives that you might have so we can continue to grow together. Looking at the Bucks, I've been pleased to see George Hill have a good series and become more indispensable here. That is gratifying. At the start of the series, I was arguing with a lot of people. I'm like, they should play George Hill more, and I'm happy that Coach Bud and the organization agreed with me. And the real interesting nuance of news that I haven't seen widely reported today is that Coach Budenholzer, well, I mean, it's been all over Twitter, but it hasn't been in general DFS arenas, is Coach Budenholzer coming out and saying that Tatum or Green, Tatum or Draymond Green? I assume Draymond Green is significantly more expensive. But I'm much more excited to play Draymond Green than Tatum. But he's $1,600 more on both sides. 14 and 16, I think it is. But I'm more excited to play Draymond Green than I am to play Jason Tatum. And we'll get back to that again. But it's going to be verbatim what I said 2 days ago, more or less. Coach Budenholzer came out and said, even though Brogdon is returning and will come off the bench, we are not taking minutes away from George Hill. He's been that good. Now, he's coming off the bench. Mirotic is going to continue to start, and they're not taking minutes away from George Hill. That should mean that Pat Connaughton is going to get the haircut here. And I'm upset because Josh Engelman has apparently permanently infiltrated my vocabulary. But what can you do? So I have concern there. It seems they're committing. Now, I'm not shocked. I still actually projected George Hill for a couple minutes less than last game. And on neither site am I super interested on George Hill, just because there is some negative correlation with Eric Bledsoe. Not a ton, who's apparently going to play 28 minutes regardless of what they do with George Hill. But there's some negative correlation there. But I still would rather $4,900 Eric Bledsoe than $4,200 George Hill. I like George Hill a ton as a player, but now the price is up and the ownership is up. I'm fine with playing $4,200 George Hill. He's one of my favorite value plays, but I imagine I would not have as much as I would in a vacuum, simply because I would just end up with Bledsoe more often, and you only want so many bucks against the Celtics, etc., etc. Yeah, I think I would entirely avoid Pat Connaughton because I think there's a chance he plays 20 minutes. Let's assume, I don't think they give Brogdon a lot. I assume Brogdon will play something like 15 minutes. So, very similar to Marcus Smart. I thought Marcus Smart would play high teens. I think I said 18 or 19. He ended up playing 15. I think you're looking probably at something like that. But they're running a pretty tight rotation, and those 15 minutes have got to come off somebody. I don't think it's likely to be Ersan Ilyasova, who again isn't getting a pile of time himself. He's playing 13 to 17 minutes per game in this series. But I think it's likely that they take that Sterling Brown does not play. He'd been playing 0 to, I think he played 9 minutes in the last game. I think those 9 minutes go to Malcolm Brogdon. And he's got to grab 6 minutes from somewhere. Let's assume they're all from Pat Connaughton. Pat Connaughton played 32 minutes and change in this last game. So I think that's my most likely guess, is that they stick basically with an 8-man rotation. Still no Snell. Sterling Brown is gone now. And you get 25, 26 minutes of Pat Connaughton. But there's a chance that number goes lower and he's still going to be pretty highly owned. Obviously, the price on DraftKings is still pretty compelling. But I would rather play George Hill. I would rather play Austin Rivers. There's just guys I would rather play over Pat Connaughton tonight, and that haircut could be interesting. There is a chance that they take time off Miro, but Miro, again, did not play a ton. He only played 24 minutes in the last game. I really don't think he drops that much. Message on the Twitter says, how many Celtics in GPP would be too many? I would need to know a site and a format to answer that question. I like Brook Lopez a lot. Both sites. On FanDuel, I still think I'm a little more. It's basically a three-center story where Capella's ownership will now have fallen down to such a low number. I don't mind that tournament bullet. He was too owned for that even to make sense for the first 4 games of the series, where he came out and he was more expensive than Horford and more owned than Horford, and we laughed and made a lot of money, and that number has been steadily decreasing. But still, when it was like, even last game he was down to 5,800 or whatever, and so he was still 30-something% on. I'm like, I don't know about that. I think his minutes continue to decrease, and they fell off a goddamn cliff. Enough people notice that where either site, if you want to fire the bullet now, it's probably at the point where it makes sense. This is similar to my logic yesterday on Danny Green. Yesterday was the first time I went, yeah, I kind of like Danny Green. I believe that for every player there is a point of ownership at which it is advantageous to have them. Start of the series, Danny Green, because the value associate was 40-45% owned. That just doesn't math out. He's not going to get there often enough that that's the right play. There was a chance that he put up his 30-32 fantasy points when he was 40% owned. So again, that was just dumb luck. But yesterday was the first day I was like, yeah, that ownership should finally have fallen low enough where today I actually liked that as a play and got lucky, and that was the game he happened to put up 30-32, whatever the hell he ended up with. Sort of the same thing here. Still don't like Clint Capella by any reason, but the ownership now should have fallen down to 10%-ish because people figured out that this is a GOAT spot for Horford, and Brook Lopez's minutes have come back up because they've made some adjustments, and his price has consistently fallen, and so it's the first time where playing Capella feels fine to me. I'll put it that way. Same thing as Danny Green. Not excited to play Clint Capella. Wasn't excited to play Danny Green yesterday. But they're now at the ownership point where those plays make sense, or at least aren't objectively horrible. So yeah, they've made some adjustments on both ends of the court with the way they are using Brook Lopez, giving him more tolerable assignments on defense. Running some Giannis and Brolo pick and rolls on offense, which is something they basically didn't do the entire season. They've been doing more the last 2 games, and they've been really, really effective. So they've managed to get him back out there. And credit to Coach Bud, that is a tough thing to do in a really tough matchup. The adjustments, and again, we don't have a ton of time, but the adjustments made by the Bucks this series have been really, really impressive. As far as the way they've aligned their defense in general, going from almost never switching to switching a ton. And what we've seen versus, taking that absolute beating from the Celtics at home to how well they've rallied. Just really impressive for me as sort of a side note there. But yeah, I like Eric Bledsoe. I have him projected for 28 minutes and 31 fantasy points. That feels pretty good at $4,900. It's been a horrifically bad matchup for him. So this leads into the larger question of Giannis. Now, 10-3 on DraftKings and 12-5 on FanDuel are very, very different things. And the small forward position on FanDuel as opposed to there are no positions on DraftKings, even on a 2-game slate, which is still very aggravating for me. But both Brook Lopez and Eric Bledsoe are pretty compelling value on DraftKings. So, obviously, I have no issue with any amount of Giannis. I briefly alluded to 2 games ago and spoke about at length 1 game ago in this series the fact that Giannis has started to figure this out. They had been just simply building walls, and him just crashing directly ass into the lane hadn't been working that well. Now, it's also got something to do with the fact that they have finally uncorked him as far as minutes go. Even just looking at the sole distribution of what his minutes have been in this series, they've come up in general. In Game 3, he managed to get 39 minutes. So that has something to do with his super productivity. But last game was 34 minutes, 70 fantasy points. 39 points, 16 rebounds. Like, it wasn't even super skill block game. 15 for 22 from the field against the Celtics is still pretty nice. But just getting to the line a butt ton. 22 free throw attempts in that game for him. He's simply just rotating, coming less straight down the gut. Running in, you see it behind George Hill sometimes, you see it behind Middleton sometimes, and just finding ways to basically be a step deeper when he has to gather. And that's just Beats getting more foul calls. His shots are being more accurate. Again, they've made some really nice adjustments on both ends of the court. There's a really interesting conversation about, Brad Stevens, who was everybody's, last year with how far that team went without Hayward, without Irving, and it was just everyone's, best coach in the NBA. I mean, the hyperbole got a little bit out of control there. There are talent issues here, but he is losing the best coach in this series battle pretty significantly thus far. Really like what Coach Bud has done on both ends of the court here. So I guess my point is, on DraftKings, 10-3 is objectively too cheap for Giannis. This is the first game of the series I haven't projected higher than Harden. I still like them both a lot at their DraftKings prices. 10K for both of those guys who project to get a little bit over 60 for me is pretty exceptional. So, I like some exposure to these guys. Now, I'm in one lineup. I won't even say I'm more inclined to, because I went back and forth between how I was going to build this. But in this lineup, I went with Harden and Kyrie and the Bucks value, because there is a real negative correlation with, Giannis having 40% usage and taking 22 free throws and taking 20 shots, and anyone else having just the opportunity to get there. So, that just sort of leads, if you're building a single lineup, again, MMEing this is sort of a more abstract conversation, but if you're building a lineup, I'm a fan of having Giannis and a piece of that value. But if you're not playing Giannis, you can get away with playing Rolo and Eric Bledsoe and George Hill. And now you've got some pretty solid value with some additional, or, getting Ersan in there just in case of foul trouble. Like, there's just a couple ways that goes a little bit better. So, in this one lineup in front of me, I have Chris Paul and no Harden, a pile of Bucks, and no Giannis. So this is a non-Giannis, non-Harden lineup, which feels weird. But you can, certainly on a two-game slate, you can play Brook Lopez, Eric Bledsoe, and Giannis. In the last game, you got 25 out of Bledsoe and 20 out of Brolo and 70 out of Giannis. If you take 10 points off Giannis and give 5 to each of those guys, and you're getting 30 off Bledsoe, 25 off Brolo, and 60 off Giannis, that would have worked just fine. But there is some interesting, if you're building a single lineup, decisions there with, I'm going to play Chris Paul instead of Harden. I'm going to play a pile of Bucks, play Bledsoe and Middleton, and 1 or 2 of the value pieces there, because they're just all priced really, really well. But again, in that last game, you had Giannis take just a butt ton of shots over these last couple games, where he went to the line infinitely. He took 22 shots in this last game. So, and, by extension, no one else took a ton. Now, Chris Middleton, should point out, is still underpriced at $6,300 for Chris Middleton and $4,900 for Eric Bledsoe. This is the first time that barely I have Eric Bledsoe as a slightly better point per dollar play. And again, I'm a huge Eric Bledsoe fan relative to Chris Middleton. If you watch the shows all year, I talked about Bledsoe. And I think that was the right play. He certainly spiked a lot more upsides and was under-owned and was underpriced, and that just made a lot more sense. But this just projects to be a Middleton series. The last game he had 30 fantasy points, and that was shooting 4 for 19. Let's assume he shoots his average, which would be 9 for 19. He's putting up, 44, 45 again, and he's just really cheap on DraftKings. And I think he ends up being the forgotten guy here, because Giannis is going to be one of the highest owned players. So is Eric Bledsoe. So is Brook Lopez. You can get 50 out of Chris Middleton pretty easily. So I do think that is a guy I would want to have more of, especially if I'm not playing Giannis. So of the Bucks starters, Mirotic is probably the one I'm lowest on. Obviously, FanDuel small forward is, as always, terrible. The prices on Durant and Giannis are a little bit intimidating at this point. I've spoken that I'm worried about Hayward's ownership. So, Mirotic obviously makes a lot more sense there. There's a chance Brogdon pulls a couple of his minutes where he only played, 24 in the last game and only had whatever it was, 17, 18 fantasy points. There's a lot of real concern there, so I pretty distinctly have Mirotic, just because of the way all these guys are priced, especially on DraftKings, under the rest of these guys. I would still prefer Hill to Connaughton, and Ersan fine as a last guy in, if you have that much. Is Austin Rivers the best value from tonight? Obviously, all things are relative to ownership, and it's difficult to know how smart people are going to get before Austin Rivers. Again, before the last game, based on the coach's comments and on his performance, and like they just treat him as part of the core team. Like when he was out, Harden would talk about him, Chris Paul would talk about him. This is, Shumpert is a shit. We've got to throw some minutes to Shumpert, and Daniel House is shit. We got to throw some minutes to Daniel House. Rivers is part of this team. They really dig on him. So I was not surprised to see him, and I guess I should start by saying this if it wasn't obvious. He got 30 whatever minutes last game. I want to say 33 or 34. So I'm a pretty big fan. And if our ownership projection is remotely correct, he's one of my favorite plays on the slate. On DraftKings, we have him at 12% owned. I'll go ahead and say it'll be higher than that. I think it'll be almost double that. But I still like him a lot. He's not a great fantasy producer. I have him projected right now for 32 minutes and 24 fantasy points, but a 24 fantasy point projection for $3,500. That's pretty sexy for me. FanDuel, I like him a lot as a punt there, and we have him projected for 12% also. So, I'm a pretty big fan of Austin Rivers. I'm just a fan. And there is some negative core. I mean, he is taking Capella's minutes. I guess I'll talk about that for a second. Again, Capella's ownership should finally be low enough for me. The math makes sense where if you want to fire that bullet, where instead of 22 minutes, he gets back up to 28 minutes, ends up being really productive and gets you 40, gets close to or scores more than Horford. Brolo doesn't get there, which is probably the most likely conclusion. I like Brolo at his price. Again, I was alluding to the fact they've made some adjustments for him on both ends of the court. He got 29 minutes each of the last two games. 29 minutes of Brolo at $4,300 is too cheap. It is not a good matchup, but I still have him projected for 25 fantasy points. That's pretty good at $4,300, and I don't expect the ownership to be too high. Capella makes sense in that context that I've now described 3 times, so hopefully we're good there. But Rivers is taking his minutes. So there is some negative correlation between those two guys. On DK, Capella has gotten kind of cheap, so I really don't mind paying the $9,000 for them collectively, but they are the two guys sharing minutes there, which feels weird. But he is taking Capella's minutes. Capella got 22 minutes in the last game. Austin Rivers got 33 or 34, which maybe some people aren't aware of. Hopefully not many people are aware of, but I do think the ownership will be higher than the 12% we currently have adjusted for that series. So let's talk more about Planet Houston. Eric Gordon's been good. It has a lot to do with... look, Golden State is a incredibly good defense. They don't always statistically mark out... They don't always play that well. Goes badly sometimes. And sometimes you have guys nursing injuries where Clay has a bad ankle and Steph has a bad ankle and Steph has a dislocated finger. And there's all kinds of stuff going on, so it's not always that great. But Golden State is an incredibly good defense. With really the singular exception of being able to get a lot of time on Steph. I'll put it this way. I'm going to look up Steph Curry on defense. And I will go ahead and guess that Eric Gordon has had that more than anyone else. I should have done this before. I apologize. Alright, so again, this is at NBA.com. Find Steph Curry. Click on him. Get profile. Click that down to matchups. Change per mode to totals. Change player on the court from offense to defense. Put in opposition for the playoffs as only Houston. And you get that he has been the primary defender most on Eric Gordon. 67% possessions. Second, where they're hiding him whenever he's on the court. Because again, Gordon has played infinitely more minutes. He's guarded Gordon the most. 67 possessions. Second most, Austin Rivers. 62. And shockingly, those guys are having a pretty good series. And that's not going to change. You have to take your better defenders, which is Iguodala, Durant, Clay, Draymond, are all extremely good defenders. They are all, on a scale of 1 to 10, at least 7+ defenders. I'm not even sure who I would call the worst of them. They're probably all 8+ defenders. They're all really, really good, and Steph's a 4 when he's healthy. So you want to produce in this series, you want to spend time on Steph, and again, Steph is spending the most time on Eric Gordon and Austin Rivers. Unsurprisingly, they're both having extremely good series. It's really no more complicated than that. And it does speak to a certain degree to James Harden's struggles. Now, James Harden is 2 more days removed from having, an eye almost ripped out of his head. That's probably going to help him a little bit. The usage is still there for him. It's obviously no issue playing James Harden. For the first time, I have him slightly less than Giannis. And again, the injuries and everything slowed that down a little bit. But no issue with that. I like Chris Paul, who, by the way, is number 3 on this list. Of guys guarded by Steph. Obviously, if they're opposing point guards, that's going to happen some reasonable amount with all the switching. But yeah, the guys guarded most by Steph Curry are having the best series. James Harden is number 7 on this list. So, yeah. He has guarded Daniel House, according to this, more than James Harden, which seems unlikely. But yeah, blowouts are always interesting on 2-game slates. We obviously had 2 yesterday, which made that kind of durfy. But he's, the guys guarded most by him are Eric Gordon, then Austin Rivers, then a big drop-off, and then Shumpert, Tucker, and Chris Paul. So getting back to the sort of the player-by-player there, I like Chris Paul quite a bit in tournaments if you don't have James Harden. I generally, in one lineup, am not going to play both those guys. Obviously, they can both get there. You can get 48 out of Chris Paul and 72 out of James Harden. That can obviously happen. No issue with Harden and Gordon because he's still cheap enough. And Gordon at 6,100 on FanDuel feels expensive. But again, if dude's going to take 20 shots and have the best matchup on the team, that's going to frequently turn into some points. I still like PJ Tucker quite a bit on DraftKings FanDuel. It's getting a little hard to stomach $6,700. We got their last game. Look, dude's going to get infinite minutes, and he's going to get more minutes at center. Presumably, there is real negative correlation between P.J. Tucker and Clint Capella, not just because of minutes, because, again, the minutes are a little more inversely Capella and Rivers, but because you want P.J. Tucker playing center. He's just down in there mucking it up, slapping the ball away, grabbing rebounds. I just ordered a P.J. Tucker jersey. Love the way that man plays basketball. I like P.J. Tucker a lot, 5,100. He's not going to be as low. Again, last game of these 2 slates, I was super on. Everyone was on Mirotic and other guys. I was like, yeah, I would rather play P.J. Tucker. I said about 11 times. And again, got very, very lucky that the day I liked him the most was the day the ownership came down and the day he happened to pop off. He's not going to score 40 whatever a game. But when he's getting this much time at center and he's going to play 40 minutes, he does get a projection for me of like 34 fantasy points, which is 0.85 fantasy points a minute. That's not a brilliant total, but per minute, but it's a pretty decent total at $5,100. So I'm still just fine with any amount of PJ Tucker on DK. He's fine to play on FanDuel. Power forward is obviously a bit shitty. We can talk about that specifically if someone wants to fire the question. And you can Shumpert. He's in play at minimum, and 31, I think, is the DK price. Let's go ahead and talk about the Warriors for a bit here. Again, this obviously a huge game. Winning Game 5 is something like 80% advancing the series, so we can expect both teams to really, get in there for value. Is that Boban getting riled up? Yeah, he's upstairs going nuts about something. Here, I will text and I'll see if I can get someone to... I don't think anyone else is home. But there we go. I've texted the fam. If anyone else is home, they'll tranquilize or dart him. Still really like Draymond. Still really like him on FanDuel. Still really love him on DraftKings. Real chance of 40 minutes. If not, you're going to get 38 or something. Playing at center, whereas it's a bonus for a guy like Tucker. Draymond's ability to dribble a little and pass a little and just get out and lead the defense when he's playing center. Your triple-double odds go up significantly when he's playing at the 5, say, without Cousins. Cousins in this series, I have Draymond for like 37 points a game. With Cousins out, I have him for 43. Again, before the series, I said I have Draymond at 43 points a game, Horford at 40 points a game. They're both sticking pretty goddamn close to those averages. He's just a good play at that point, and there still is a very significant ceiling on both sides. You can get 10 steals and blocks in this matchup out of Draymond pretty easily, so on FanDuel, yeah, you can get 60 out of him. I still, at his price on DraftKings, prefer Durant to Curry. I would rather play $9,300 Durant than $7,900 Curry. Again, this largely comes down to matchups and the fact that Curry is still just not 100% to me. Last game looked better. Maybe the improvement continues. Maybe like, say, Pascal Siakam yesterday. He has a very good game and shows that he's all the way back. He's had another day to rest. No issue with it. I would slightly rather play the 9,300 on Durant than the 7,900 on Curry. To contextualize, I actually have Giannis and Harden over Durant today for the first time in a while. They've been razor close all series. $9,200, $9,300 Durant, 10-2, 10-3 Giannis and Harden have been pretty close for me all series. As far as the three guys I like the most, I'll generally go with the two super studs today a little bit over Durant, but they've always profiled pretty similarly, and today is no different. On FanDuel, where it's $8,700 Curry, now you're having a conversation versus, Kyrie Irving, who on DK is $300 more, but on FanDuel is $1,100 more. There, I'm fine with playing two other small forwards, be they cheap or expensive, and getting Steph out there for some obvious leverage against Durant. I do generally like having one of those guys. Clay seems to be 100%. It's not a super Clay spot. A couple guys on this team guard him pretty well. The odds of getting the 40 real points out of Clay seem fairly unlikely here. Not out of play on FanDuel at 7,000. Like him a little more at DK 59. But again, the Houston defense is very solid, and I don't want to overexpose to this team. But it should be reiterated that these guys should get fairly monstrous minutes as far as the starters go. Iguodala is not 100%. At his price, I generally am going to like other guys on both sites. Obviously, nothing wrong with playing him. FanDuel 6,200. He can pick up a couple steals and a couple blocks. DK 4,800 is just sort of an appealing price if he's going to play 35 minutes. But is not 100%. I think generally there's no reason to go there in one lineup today, and I'd keep my exposure a little more nominal if I was building 100 lineups or some such. But yeah, in this last game, again, limited Iguodala got 30 minutes. Clay played 36 with 5 fouls, which limited his time. He was going to get 40. Draymond played 41. Steph played 43, and Durant played 43. These guys are getting a butt ton of minutes. This should increase our appeal for them. The only bench player who's really at all in play would be Kevon Looney. Because of positionality and price on FanDuel mostly. You can do it on DK. Would much rather do it on FanDuel. But if there's time limited for Iguodala, he tends to be the guy who picks up the time. And in that last game, for example, he did get 22 minutes, 20 low minutes. In this game, I still have him projected for 14. So I'm not super excited. But if I have to play a bench guy, it's going to be Kevon Looney. But all the starters here, I'm wanting to make sure I have at least one, if not potentially 2 or 3. Do I still like Bledsoe with the projection at 52%? I think that's around where the number should be. So I would generally be around meeting that. A little more, a little less, I don't care. You want to play 100% him? I don't mind. You want to play 0% him because he's popular? I don't mind. He is appropriately owned for being what is, frankly, pretty underpriced. Let's look at some questions. I've been through all the games. If I miss something, we'll let it come back to me. Starting at the beginning, Green or Tatum? I'm presuming that is Draymond. I slightly prefer playing Draymond Green. I do think Tatum picked up a couple more minutes than we're generally going to get. He's done well, but he's a little bit over his head. The price isn't cheap enough anymore. It's say $7,000 instead of 6, or 58 instead of 54. So I'm a little more excited about playing Draymond Green. Nothing wrong with playing Jason Tatum. Who would be your top 3 value plays, top 3 lock-worthy players? My top 3 value plays are probably Eric Bledsoe, Austin Rivers, and Brook Lopez on DraftKings, if that's the site you're asking about. If I believed Austin Rivers was going to be 12% owned, I would probably lock that in there. If I was going to 100% a guy, yeah, I think it would be him at that point. Other guys who wouldn't, kill me to see having that kind of projection on, Giannis is just too cheap on DraftKings, and I think safer than Harden. The ownership I expect to be more heavily on Giannis, and I don't have their projection that different, so I'm kind of even on them in tournaments. I like Giannis for a couple more points. His arrow is obviously trending a better way. He's obviously healthier, and if the minutes, if you get 42 minutes out of Giannis, dude could put on a goddamn show. But, you know, James Harden, when he gets significantly lower owned than Giannis, and, you know, the usage is still there, and he's still James Harden, like, so if I was going to lock a guy, I'd more likely be Giannis, and I'd just be like, yeah, he's getting me 50, I'm hoping for 75, I'm putting his ass in there. I generally wouldn't do it. That's not a slate I'm super thrilled in locking anyone 100%. You could obviously do Bledsoe. You're taking a stand. But it's, yeah. Best core 3 to build from on FanDuel. I got nothing. Probably Al Horford. It's just really safe. He's going to be 61% owned or something. Maybe a little less than that. Somewhere between 50 and 65 or something on Al Horford. It's going to be a pretty big number for him on FanDuel. Price just still isn't high enough. Not that many people can go Capella. People will save and go Brolo quite a bit. So maybe you get, you know, 50% Horford, 40% Brolo, 10% Capella. Is Smart in your player pool? No. Would you play him at all on a 20 max? No. They need to win the game. He's not 100%. They like what he brings. You know, maybe he gets... I think he probably gets 20, 21 minutes tonight. They like what he has. It wouldn't surprise me to see him grab a chunk of minutes from Hayward also, as we previously alluded to. But I don't think I would have him on DK. On FanDuel, you can make a much better argument, in my opinion. My dog is going nuts. Can you rate Harden, Giannis, and Durant on DK? Again, this is a very nominal distinction. One of the issues with rankings is that they imply an even integral basis, and it's not the same. Like, I see people all the time where I was helping someone build an algorithm the other day, and he had what I have is this, and this, and then this ranks them and gives them a percentage boost or decrease in their ownership based on whether it's the fastest game of the night or the second fastest game of the night or the third fastest game of the night. And I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever fucking seen. There are days in which the fastest game has an over-under of 240, the next one's 238, and the next one's 237. And there's days where the fastest is 222, the next is 211, and the next is 208. And you're equating there a 208 and a 236 and keeping them the same statistically on this. It just doesn't make any goddamn sense. Again, that just bringing it back to, you know, trying to rank things, because it falsely implies that every day rankings are scaled identically, and that the interstitial space, I think is what it's called in game design, but that the difference, the variation between each spot is always the same, and it just isn't. Morris, Tucker, or Bledsoe on DK? Alright, so can you rate Harden, Giannis, Durant? Sorry, was the question that led me to that little rant. I have them all close enough to tie that it's really difficult for me to do that. They are close enough for me as far as their ranking, ceiling, points per dollar, all the various ways you would rate them, that it's more important to me to be consistent to your lineup narrative of however the hell you're building it. So I will very slightly say today Giannis, Harden, Durant, based on price, ownership, etc., everything on DK, but no strong take whatsoever among those three, really. Morris, Tucker, or Bledsoe DK utility. Again, I'm fine with all those guys. I generally probably slightly prefer Tucker and Bledsoe. Tucker feels the safest. Bledsoe's gonna be the chalkiest, but maybe has the highest ceiling. Really build a lineup that's designed to sort of do something. Projection for Bledsoe, I think I have him at 28 minutes and 31 fantasy points. Mirotic, thoughts? I think he's legitimately still good on FanDuel. I think on DK, I'd probably try to stay away. I still think he's going to be a little too highly owned. There's a chance Brogdon takes away from him. He's obviously fine. Still keeping his starting role. So I have no issue if you have any amount of Mirotic, but trying to get more to Tucker and Rivers and guys around there. The amount of Bledsoe you have disgusted me. Good, you're thinking, well, that's inappropriate. Would Middleton lose some usage to Brogdon? No, not to a relevant degree. Can you rank the forwards on DK in the 5K range? I think I kind of just did that, but clarify that question a little for me. I don't have time to look up at this point. In DK cash, Gordon or Tatum? Harden and Horford are your only other guys on those relative teams. That's close. That's really close. I think in cash I would play Eric Gordon over Jason Tatum, which feels dirty to say, but you gotta keep your head on a swivel. If Boston-Milwaukee were to get out of hand again, and the second game does not, who would you project to have the better night, Bledsoe or Iggy? I will still project Bledsoe to have the better night in that scenario. If only playing one lineup on FanDuel in a tournament, do you play or fade Harden? There's so many related decisions to that conversation as to whether or not you play Giannis and whether or not you play Austin Rivers is related to a certain degree, and your shooting guard spots and how much you're focusing on each game. That I dislike reducing a decision with that many variables to a simple binary, but I did build one FD GPP lineup, and it does have James Harden in it, if that helps you. But don't misinterpret that as, if you're building one, you must have him in it. There are, again, a lot of structures where you can play Giannis. If you don't play Giannis, playing the other Bucks makes more sense. So you could think that the first game gets wicked out of hand again because... and by the way, that's been a little... The amount of shit I took on Twitter for Bucks in 6, Raptors in 5, where it looks like now I have a very good chance at missing it by 1 or 2 games at most. Do you like Horford or Draymond more on DK? Again, I have them very, very, very close. Last game we had them almost on the nose. I said I slightly prefer Draymond to Horford. I think Draymond gets 2.5 points more. He scored 2 or 2.5 points more. They were both like 2 points under their projection for me. At their current prices, points per dollar, I slightly prefer Horford, but I think he's also a little higher. Like they're in the same ballpark. Again, the most dominant factors in making that decision for me would be other guys in those games in my lineup, what story I'm trying to tell, will either game blow out, etc., etc. Durant, Curry, and Steph together on FanDuel, too much. Well, first of all, Curry and Steph are generally considered the same player, so I'm confused by your question of Durant, Curry, and Steph together. I'm guessing that's supposed to be Draymond, Durant, and Steph together, but hit me back. J. Kelly 13. Giannis and Tucker or Kevin Durant and Middleton for a DK GPP. I would probably play KD and Middleton a little bit more. Tucker will be reasonably popular. Middleton is really just too cheap. He's one of those guys who just carries a significant ceiling that enough people really aren't looking at. Yes, you did mean Draymond. Draymond, Durant, and Curry together on FanDuel, too much. No, in a vacuum. They're all guys we project to play a lot of minutes, and obviously a must-win game. I do not, again, I give the same answer frequently, but it's the best way I can answer this question. I do not think the addition of the third of those guys adds to the value of the others. Now, Draymond, to a certain degree, is incidental in the equation. Like, Draymond I like a lot, and the position on FanDuel is balls, so if you're going to throw, 9K at him, he's going to get there with steals and blocks and rebounds and assists to a certain extent. It's whether or not Steph and Durant can each produce enough offense to justify those prices. So I don't think I'm going to ignore Draymond kind of for this situation because, again, FanDuel is great because there are these subtle decision-making points as opposed to DK. It's just like, yeah, most points. On FanDuel, you have to look at Draymond versus all the other power forwards. And it's fugly. So, that's a real factor in that decision. But Steph and Durant, I don't think in a vacuum one enhances the other. I think you lose more than you gain when you select them. That being said, there are any number of infinite scenarios that become more proportionately likely on a 2-game slate than a 10-game slate, where having both of them is just fine. The first game can go to shit, and then, oh yeah, that worked. Like, it can really be that easy. So I'm fine with it. But I would be lying if I said I think the addition of one enhances the other. I do think it is net a downgrade if you play the games out 1,000,000 times. But 100,000 of those 1,000,000 times, the first game will go to shit and they collectively score 120 and your disco either way. Giannis, and we did that. Can you rank the forwards on DK in the 5K range? Yeah, I've seen that question a couple times and I still don't know exactly what it means. Nariki FanDuel, please. I don't know what that question means, Nariki. Curry or Kyrie on DK? You already have KD and Draymond. Definitely Kyrie for me at that point, not close. If you already have KD and Draymond in one lineup. Again, unless you decide you want to fade the first game because you think they get destroyed, and then, yeah, get Curry in there. Like, again, you got to tell a story. Morris or Tucker on FanDuel? Again, you're telling a story. I have them pretty similar. I think I would play Tucker slightly more, but I'm a stan. You hear Boban. You do hear Boban. George Hill and Horford or CP3 and Lopez. Yep, those are both fine. More raw points. Gordon or Morris, same price on Yahoo. just as a raw points. I'll assume that's Eric Gordon and not Gordon Hayward. I will take Eric Gordon. Any betting leans tonight? No, I haven't taken any time to look at that, and again, we're 3 minutes from out. Thoughts on Clay? Fine to play. Yeah, he's appropriately priced and owned for the odds of him getting there. Raw, DK, Pat, or Hill. Hill not terribly close. Well, I guess I have him by 2 points, so I guess that is pretty close. But I'd rather go with George Hill tonight. I think the ownership may still be higher on Pat Connaughton, and he should get the haircut. Ursan doesn't correlate negatively with Lopez, right? They're cheap enough that it's an irrelevant concern. Okay, Baines starting instead of Marcus Morris. I was close that they moved Baines to the bench for scoring. So this destroys Gordon Hayward at this point. Well, I don't know about destroys. He's $4,100. But there's real potential for minutes. Baines makes an interesting play now in like $1,000 in the showdown slate. I'm going to go look at that. I think on DK, he was the 1K special in the showdown, right? People always say I don't look at showdown enough. I think Baines was 1K, wasn't he? He's 1K in the showdown on DK. That makes him kind of interesting. You can make some pretty nice pay-ups there at that point. So, yeah, I'd have some interest in $1,000 Aaron Baines in showdown. He can get steals, blocks, rebounds, get enough there. I still think he plays to the order of 16 minutes. And I imagine Hayward gets most of the haircut. But with Baines picking up now presumably into double-digit minutes, he's been seeing just single-digit minutes, I think it's appropriate to have even a little more concern about the Celtics rotation. That's a lot of bodies now. So be a little concerned. Kyrie usage up even more. That's a brilliant point, which should have been the first thing I said. Yeah. Taking Marcus Morris out of there and replacing him with Aaron Baines. Yeah. I scrolled down. I saw it. How do we alert Eddie? Yeah, I'm going to give a couple key people in the chat my text phone. I'm going to give a couple people who are always here my phone number so they can do that. So, yes, bonus for Kyrie Baines himself. I imagine he is now the best FanDuel center punt, putting him in play. I would still probably rather $4,700, but none of the centers on FanDuel were that brilliant where now giving him a shot of getting you 20 doesn't make him an interesting punt. So I would try to get some Baines himself at $3,500 in on FanDuel. Again, I would think 14 or 15 minutes is all you see here. CP3 Middleton DK utility. If you have Harden, certainly Middleton. If you have Giannis, probably, again, it's the opposite of your Harden Giannis take. If you have them both, I will generally take Middleton of those two guys. Or if you have neither, I will generally take Middleton of those two guys. That's pretty interesting, though. Brolo or Baines, DK, GPP. I need to look up Baines' price. I don't remember it. Generally, I'm going to say Brolo, though. We're at like 15 seconds, aren't we? Well, I guess there's not a lot we can do now. I don't know how much Baines was. Do you like Marcus Morris now? Yeah, I liked him more than I did before. That's definitely a cookie for him where he can, carry some of that weight. 5 seconds, so I apologize for not getting to that news until the last couple of seconds there. I like Marcus Morris more now because now, in fairness, there are two reasons I would like him more. One would be his ownership would drop based on the fact he was moved to the second unit and people are donkey. But two, whereas I think he probably loses a couple minutes, he should get much more significant usage. Beats up on Hayward pretty bad. So let's look at some ownership on some of these things. Yeah, and sorry for the minute it took me to come around to that, and then it's delayed by even a little bit more for you guys. All right. FanDuel ownerships. Horford, 33%. Damn, it's just a tonnage of disrespect you are showing to my dude. He's literally one of, at most, 2 centers on this slate who are priced not objectively horrifically. The tonnage of disrespect they show for Big Al on FanDuel. So yeah, the biggest tournament on FanDuel. Al Horford, 33%. Mirotic, 51. Bledsoe, 32. Rozier, 19. Ursan, 30. Caprolo's got to be 40-something. He has to be. There's going to be more Burlow than Horford on FanDuel. Yep, Burlow 42. So Burlow and Horford make up 76% of the center ownership. So you're going to have Capella and Baines make up the other 24 or whatever. So Baines will be nice at that ownership. Giannis 34. Okay. Marcus Smart 21. Pat Connaughton 20. George Hill 33. I like George Hill. Okay? I was conducting the goddamn train, but 33% at $5,400. With Brogdon coming back, and I know they said it wouldn't affect his minutes. That doesn't necessarily work out that way. Middleton at 25% is brilliant. Very excited about that number. Let's go to the main event and take a look at DraftKings. 100K? That can't be the biggest. 555K. Okay, I imagine that's the biggest. Ship broken? Oh, that didn't do what it was supposed to do. Let's try this. Okay, that worked. Yeah, and this ownership a little closer to what I expected and a little more tolerable. Well, the real question will be where that Austin Rivers ownership ends up. But let's look at prices on some dudes. Sure, I will check the showdown ownership on Aaron Baines. That should not be too great a task. Yeah, I wasn't kidding. If you're in there every day for the show, send me a private message in the Slack and I'll give a couple of you my phone number. And if you want to be responsible for, oh shit, I saw news, Eddie didn't see it immediately. This will never happen when I'm on with someone else, because literally I check news and alerts every 30 seconds. But when I'm trying to burn through everyone's questions as quickly and efficiently as possible, I can get lost for a minute or two, and sometimes a minute or two is a very relevant chunk of time. DraftKings ownership, Giannis, 51. Feels about right. Middleton, 38. I'd want a little more, but feels about right. Kyrie Irving, 37. I'd want more. Eric Bledsoe, 36. I'd want more. Pat Connaughton, 33. I'd want less. Marcus Morris, 33. Yeah, that's about right. I'd want a little more maybe, but I do like him more with the move to the bench. If he hadn't been moved, I would have wanted less. Jaylen Brown, 31. Sure. Al Horford, 27. Okay. Jason Tatum, 26, which just cracks me up, by the way. That's constantly those two guys have almost identical ownership, and that's just not the way that would work whatsoever. Ersan Ilyasova, 25. George Hill, 21. So yeah, on DK, you got George Hill. Last slate, I believe he was 22 to 44, so he was half. Now he's 2/3 the ownership of Pat Connaughton, but again, Pat Connaughton's going to lose, I think, 6 minutes here, maybe more. Gordon Hayward, 20. Might have some trouble there. Brook Lopez, 17. I'm a real big fan of Brook Lopez, 17. We'll see how it goes. He has not been great, although 20 for 4,300 is not, the end of your universe, and 30 from him in 30 minutes would not shock me. Again, they've done some stuff that makes me a little more excited about that. Marcus Smart, 5%. I'd have less. Aaron Baines, that many, 4%. Terry Rozier, 2.6. Malcolm Brogdon, 1.1. Sterling Brown, 0.4. Semi Ojeleye, 0.2, never the answer. Tony Snell, 0.1, won't play. Tim Frazier, 0.07, won't play. Bonzi Colson, 0.05. Brad Wanamaker, 0.03. Gershon Yabusele, 0.02. RJ Dozier, 0.2. Hunter, 0.2. Daniel Tice, 0.2. DJ Wilson, 0.01. Bob Williams, 0.01. Jonathan Gibson, 0.00. Pau Gasol, 0.00. Inactive due to an ankle issue. Congratulations. You played yourself. Mirotic started off hot. I'm happy to hear that. I see Bledsoe has a three-pointer. Jesus, Mirotic. Yeah, I just clicked back to the FanDuel lineup I was looking at. Little 12er. Little 12er for Miro. It's pretty exciting. And I said I would look at the ownerships. Let me see if I can... Are there any guys in those contests? I don't mess around on their lineup screen enough. I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. Showdown, something. Okay, what's a big showdown contest? I got a 10. I got a 7K. 60K? 60K. I have to figure as big as... Well, I'm looking at a 60K. If it's not the largest tournament, then... Tough titty. Aaron Baines was owned 4%. So yeah, 4% Aaron Baines at $1,000 would have opened up some interesting things. Giannis, 96%. Kyrie Irving, 1 turnover in 3 minutes. That doesn't seem good. So yeah, that may objectively faceplant me, but that's going to happen once in a while. So I am done, everyone. I am off to corral a particularly aggravating dog at the moment. I should have 2 games again tomorrow, so I will be back again. And then I believe Friday I am off where there is no basketball. So talk to y'all tomorrow. Bonne chance. And